1 minute ago, satellite thermal imaging detected a 3-kilometer crack racing down Mount Etna's eastern flank at 47 meters per hour. But what happened next defied everything volcanologists thought they knew about volcanic behavior. The crack stopped, paused, and then began to pulse with a rhythmic expansion that scientists are calling geological respiration. Dr. Marco Benedetti's hands were shaking as he radioed the emergency command center. The mountain has developed a heartbeat. Every single monitoring station from Catania to Taormina is now detecting synchronized pressure waves emanating from Etna's core. Waves that pulse in perfect 11-minute intervals, as if something massive deep beneath Sicily is slowly waking up. Here's what's really terrifying. The last time geological records showed this exact breathing pattern, Mount Etna didn't just erupt. It collapsed entirely, sending a wall of rock and water across the Mediterranean that reached 3 countries in under 2 hours. So the question that has emergency planners across Europe scrambling isn't whether Etna will breathe again. It's whether each breath is counting down to the moment the entire mountain structure gives way. While you're watching this, Etna's breathing cycle has completed 3 full respirations. Right now, across 47 monitoring stations surrounding Mount Etna, seismographs are recording something unprecedented in volcanic science. The mountain isn't just erupting, it's developing a biological-like respiratory system with mathematical precision. Every 674 seconds, Etna's entire 3,350-meter structure expands by 3.7 centimeters. The expansion holds for exactly 23 seconds, then contracts back to baseline. But here's what's really strange. Ground-penetrating radar shows this breathing extends 15 kilometers deep into the Earth's crust. We're not talking about typical volcanic pressure release. We're talking about a coordinated geological organism that appears to be drawing breath from chambers deeper than any volcano has ever accessed before. Scientists at the Osservatorio Etneo initially dismissed early readings as equipment malfunctions. Why would a volcano suddenly develop a perfect breathing rhythm? But when 5 separate sensor arrays confirmed the same pattern, the scientific community was forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. Mount Etna has developed a respiratory cycle. This breathing mechanism is fundamentally different from standard volcanic behavior. Typical volcanoes release pressure through eruptions, gas venting, or minor seismic activity. But Etna's new behavior resembles what volcanologists call gas pistoning, except on a massive synchronized scale that has never been documented before. Dr. Elena Rossi, lead volcanologist at the monitoring station in Catania, explains, normal gas piston events are localized, chaotic, and irregular. What we're seeing is an entire mountain breathing in perfect synchronization. Every monitoring station records the exact same 11-minute, 23-second cycle. The precision is terrifying. But to understand why this breathing pattern has volcanologists terrified, we need to explore Etna's ancient rhythm of destruction. For 500,000 years, Mount Etna has followed one rule: destruction through chaos. Until now. Mount Etna stands as Europe's most active volcano, with over 200 recorded eruptions painting Sicily's landscape in layers of fire and ash. For millennia, Etna has been a monster of magnificent unpredictability. Sudden explosions, random lava flows, and violent pyroclastic surges that have shaped the fate of eastern Sicily. Standing 3,350 meters high, this massive stratovolcano dominates eastern Sicily. It covers an area of 1,190 square kilometers with a basal circumference of 140 kilometers. Beneath its imposing surface lies 500,000 years of volcanic history, beginning as a submarine volcano before growing above sea level. What makes Etna particularly dangerous is its complex structure. Unlike simpler volcanoes, Etna is built from multiple volcanic centers that coalesced over time. Its current form represents layers upon layers of activity, with a younger stratovolcano built atop an ancient shield volcano. This complex architecture creates structural weaknesses, particularly along the eastern flank. The most prominent feature of this weakness is the Valle del Bove, an enormous horseshoe-shaped depression on Etna's eastern flank. Scientists now understand this valley wasn't formed by eruptions, but by catastrophic collapse about 8,000 years ago. Dr. Antonio Volcano, a geophysicist specializing in volcanic collapse mechanics, explains, the Valle del Bove is essentially a massive scar from a previous collapse. It represents what happens when Etna's eastern flank becomes unstable and gives way. And now, with this breathing pattern concentrated along the same fault. Throughout recorded history, Etna's eruptions have followed patterns volcanologists understood: pressure buildup, explosive release, dormant periods. But in all those centuries of monitoring, scientists had never recorded what began happening at exactly 2:19 a.m. this morning. What Dr. Benedetti's instruments recorded wasn't volcanic, it was biological. When the 3-kilometer crack first appeared on Etna's eastern flank, Dr. Marco Benedetti expected standard seismic chaos. Instead, his equipment began detecting something that challenged fundamental volcanic science: synchronized pressure waves emanating from Etna's core with metronome precision. The initial crack detection came from satellite thermal imaging, which identified unusual heat signatures along a precise line. But as monitoring teams deployed to investigate, they discovered something unprecedented. Rather than widening continuously, the crack was expanding and contracting in a perfect rhythm. Ground deformation sensors confirmed what seemed impossible: the entire mountain was breathing. Each cycle begins with a subtle inflation period lasting precisely 10 minutes and 51 seconds. Then comes a 23-second hold at maximum expansion, followed by a 9-second contraction back to baseline. After a brief 3-second pause, the cycle begins again. Most troubling is how this breathing pattern is affecting Etna's unstable eastern flank. Acoustic monitoring stations deployed underwater have confirmed that the breathing motion extends well into the Ionian Sea. With each breath, the underwater portion of Etna's flank shifts by several millimeters. Dr. Sarah Chen, leading the underwater monitoring team, notes, the seafloor is moving with each breath cycle. This means the entire eastern flank, both above and below sea level, is involved in this respiratory pattern. It's an unprecedented coordination of geological movement. But when researchers rushed preliminary data to volcanic archives, what they found made their blood run cold. The 11-minute, 23-second breathing rhythm wasn't new. It had been recorded once before in geological history. The last time Etna breathed like this, it wasn't preparing to erupt, it was preparing to collapse. Here's what's keeping scientists awake at night. Etna's current breathing pattern mirrors conditions from 7,200 years ago, right before the volcano's most catastrophic structural failure in recorded geological history. Ancient seismic records preserved in volcanic ash layers show the exact same 11-minute respiratory cycle in the weeks leading up to what volcanologists call the Great Etna Collapse. When the breathing stopped, the entire southeastern flank, billions of tons of volcanic material, batkoi, slid into the Mediterranean in less than 4 hours. Research published in 2006 by the American Geophysical Union confirmed that approximately 8,000 years ago, the eastern flanks of Mount Etna suffered at least one massive collapse. The geological evidence is unmistakable. A catastrophic landslide sent billions of tons of volcanic material rushing into the Mediterranean Sea. Computer models of this ancient collapse revealed something terrifying. The resulting tsunami impacted the entire eastern Mediterranean. Wave heights reached 15 meters, striking Malta, North Africa, and even reaching coastal communities in present-day Israel, over 1,000 miles away. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neolithic settlements along the Mediterranean coast were abandoned following this event. Ancient civilizations even developed early warning systems specifically monitoring Etna's breathing pattern. When the mountain began its respiratory cycle, coastal populations evacuated inland. But today, nearly 1 million people live on Etna's flanks, and most have never heard of the volcano's ancient breathing cycle. Every breath Etna takes is being measured, mapped, and transmitted to emergency centers across 3 countries. Emergency monitoring stations from Sicily to southern Italy are now operating on 24-hour alert status. Real-time data streams feed into command centers in Catania, Rome, and Brussels as European authorities track every respiratory cycle. The breathing pattern is already affecting infrastructure across eastern Sicily. Each 3.7 centimeter expansion creates micro-stress fractures in buildings from Taormina to Catania. The port of Catania has suspended large vessel operations as harbor sensors detect rhythmic ground deformation. Aviation authorities have established a 50-kilometer exclusion zone around Etna's summit. If the breathing pattern indicates imminent collapse, airports from Sicily to Malta will implement emergency closure protocols. "We're not evacuating for an eruption," explains Giuseppe Torrisi, Catania's emergency coordinator. "We're evacuating for a geological respiratory cycle that could stop at any moment." Research published by Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in 2018 found that Etna's eastern flank is already sliding toward the Mediterranean at a rate of 14 millimeters per year. This movement isn't driven by magmatic pressure, but by simple gravity. The massive weight of the mountain is gradually pulling it seaward. The current breathing pattern is accelerating this movement. With each respiratory cycle, the eastern flank shifts an additional fraction of a millimeter. Over hundreds of cycles, this cumulative movement is pushing the unstable flank closer to catastrophic failure. But here's the terrifying reality. Current evacuation plans were designed for volcanic eruptions, not for the complete structural failure of a breathing mountain. Emergency models show that if Etna's flank collapses while the breathing cycle is active, the resulting tsunami could reach coastal cities with 30% more force than historical precedents. Deep beneath Sicily, something is teaching Mount Etna how to breathe. Advanced ground-penetrating radar reveals the mechanical source of Etna's respiratory pattern. Massive magma chambers 15 kilometers below the surface are expanding and contracting in perfect synchronization, like enormous geological lungs. Dr. Antonio Volcano's acoustic monitoring stations detect low-frequency sound waves accompanying each breath. Geological groans that suggest Etna's breathing involves the movement of material from depths previously thought impossible. For volcanic systems to access, the respiratory cycle appears to be driven by a phenomenon similar to what volcanologists call gas pistoning, but on a scale never before documented. In typical gas piston events, gas bubbles accumulate beneath a viscous lava surface, building pressure until they break through in short, irregular bursts. But Etna's breathing involves coordinated gas movement through an entire network of interconnected chambers. As pressure builds in the deepest chamber, it forces magma upward, causing the mountain to expand. When the pressure releases through deep fractures, the mountain contracts. What makes this cycle so dangerous isn't just its regularity, but its acceleration. The initial 11-minute, 23-second cycle has shortened to 11 minutes, 18 seconds. Mathematical models suggest that if this acceleration continues, the breathing. When that happens, the mountain won't just breathe, it will vibrate itself apart. And according to current acceleration rates, critical frequency could be reached within 72 hours. For the first time in geological history, 3 countries are coordinating evacuation plans for a breathing volcano. Emergency response teams across Italy, Malta, and Tunisia are implementing protocols never before tested for volcanic respiratory patterns. The European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts has activated tsunami modeling specifically for breath-induced collapse scenarios. The Italian Prime Minister's office has authorized emergency funding for real-time evacuation infrastructure. Coastal monitoring buoys from Sicily to North Africa are being repositioned to detect tsunami signatures from potential flank collapse. Dr. Sarah Chen, leading the International Volcanic Respiratory Research Team, describes the unprecedented scientific challenge. We're not just monitoring a volcano anymore. We're monitoring a geological organism with its own breathing cycle, and we don't know when it might hold its breath. Volcanologists have already detected a troubling pattern change. The most recent 24 breathing cycles have shown a slight asymmetry. Each expansion takes slightly longer than the contraction. This pattern typically precedes what specialists call a terminal breath, a final massive expansion followed by sustained contraction as structural integrity fails. Behind closed doors, scientific teams are debating whether human intervention might stop the breathing cycle. Theoretical models suggest that precisely timed underwater explosions along the fault line might disrupt the respiratory pattern. But the risks are enormous. A mistimed intervention could trigger the very collapse they're trying to prevent. Meanwhile, residents of Catania go about their daily lives, most unaware that with each breath, Mount Etna moves closer to a catastrophic restructuring of the Mediterranean coastline. As of this moment, Mount Etna has completed 127 breathing cycles, and scientists still can't predict when it will stop. As of today, no peer-reviewed publication has fully explained volcanic respiratory mechanisms, and no official risk assessment has determined the likelihood of breath-induced collapse. What is clear, Etna's behavior is changing in ways never documented before, drawing urgent attention from researchers and emergency planners across Europe. Mount Etna has erupted more than 200 times in recorded history, but the 2025 breathing event stands alone. For the first time, scientists are monitoring a volcano that has developed biological-like respiratory patterns with mathematical precision. Seismic imaging and acoustic monitoring reveal that the breathing extends deeper into Earth's structure than any volcanic system has ever accessed. Each respiratory cycle appears to connect Etna directly to mantle-level depths, suggesting the mountain may be accessing geological processes that predate human understanding of volcanic behavior. Until more data is released, the true mechanism behind Etna's breathing and its connection to historical collapse cycles remain unresolved. A stark reminder that even our most monitored volcanoes still hold secrets scientists are only beginning to uncover. The question isn't just whether Mount Etna will continue breathing, it's whether this ancient respiratory pattern is preparing the mountain for its next catastrophic exhale. And with each breath, we're one cycle closer to finding out.